The February 20th, 2025 meeting of the Credit River Planning Commission to order. Would everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, our first order of business is to approve or amend the agenda. All commission members should have received a copy of tonight's agenda. The agenda for this evening includes the consent agenda items, including meeting minutes from the December 5th, 2024 and January 16th, 2025 meetings. We have one public hearing on a proposed ordinance on cannabis. And under general business, we have draft questions for a city parks and trails assessment. Does anyone want to add or amend anything to tonight's agenda, council members? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. On tonight's consent agenda, we have two items. And those items on the planning commission consent agenda which are considered routine or non-controversial, are included as part of this consent agenda. Unless one of the planning commission members specifically requests that an item on the consent agenda be removed and considered separately, items on the consent agenda are considered under one motion, second, and vote. Any item removed from the consent agenda shall be placed at the end of general business. So as I mentioned, we've got December 5th, 2024 meeting minutes and meeting minutes from the January 16th meeting. Can I get a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda?
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Can I get a second?
I'll second.
All right, motion and second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. All right, our third order of business this evening is our public hearing on the proposed cannabis ordinance. And so commission members in their packets have received the draft ordinance language and memorandum from city planning staff. Before I open the public hearing, I'd like city staff to summarize the ordinance and offer any relevant background.
Absolutely.
You go ahead.
All right, no, I don't mean to step on anybody. So, yeah,
The
the new guy just shows up, takes over the whole meeting. My name is Joe Safi. I'm with the law firm of Kennedy and Graven. I work with Pete very closely and have been assisting many cities on cannabis related ordinances over the past few months. The kind of overview that I usually like to give, we're talking about cannabis and planning is think about it from a business perspective and then from the city staff's perspective. So the way that applications for cannabis businesses are going to work is that a business will apply to the Office of Cannabis Management for one of the many license types. The Office of Cannabis Management will reach out to the city to confirm that the proposed location of the business complies with zoning. And therefore, the ordinance is drafted to incorporate those business license types into the different zones in the city so that from a staff perspective, it's easy. So when you get the request, you say, all right, this is a cannabis retailer. You double check with the table. This meets the requirements of the zoning code. Either you have or have not received an IUP where applicable. Then the staff can just respond back to the Office of Cannabis Management, say, yep, this business does comply with zoning or does not. The Office of Cannabis Management then issues a license if the business meets all the rest of the requirements. For context, this is not a zoning specific issue, but the next step for retail businesses, both for cannabis, that's sort of what's generally been referred to as marijuana in the past, and hemp, which are the products that are available now. Businesses selling those to the public will have to register with the city. And the city in this ordinance has chosen to retain that registration authority instead of giving it to the county. And the purpose for doing that is specifically so that the city can retain control of limiting the number of cannabis retail operations to one. based on city population. So in the ordinance in front of you, the two most important parts are in the first section, which I generally refer to as the administrative section, which generally isn't zoning, except for one component, which is the buffers that are established. The buffers that are established in this ordinance are the maximum allowed under the statute. So those are 1,000 feet from a school, 500 feet from a daycare, 500 feet from a residential treatment facility, and 500 feet from a park feature.
Mhm.
That is on page 17 of your packet, page 6 of the ordinance in section 6. The more traditionally zoning components are found in your packet on pages 7 and onward, or sorry, 18, 19, and 20. And that is the actual amendment to the zoning code, which places these different types of cannabis businesses within the different districts within the city. And then based on the table, requires them all to be IUPs within the city.
Mhm.
There are also components that mirror state statute prohibiting cannabis, any of these types of cannabis businesses from operating as part of a home business, which is in rules, but belt and suspenders is also included in city code in case you ever need to decide that something is a home extended business. And that is the general overview of the ordinance. I can stand for questions now or later, or I will let you run the hearing as you want to run.
Oh, good. Thank you so much.
Close.
All right, I'll now open up the public hearing related to the proposed ordinance. This is the time for anyone interested in providing comments pertaining to this draft ordinance. And before I start, I guess I would like to just see staff, have we received any written comments so far?
No.
Okay. Seeing that there are no written comments that we've received, is there anyone here who wishes to speak this evening on this issue or ask questions? Are there any members of the public wishing to ask questions or offer their thoughts? Going a third time. All right. Seeing that there is no one wishing to make public comment, can I get a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll make the motion, close the hearing.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor of closing the public hearing, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. Are there any planning commission members who have questions, comments, or concerns that they want to share or address regarding the proposed ordinance? I have a few, but anybody else want to kick it off?
Is this only regarding the point of sale, not cultivation? Or is that?
This ordinance does address cultivation. It addresses all of the license types from, I guess, it's not, I used to say seed to retail, but technically seeds are regulated by the Department of Agriculture, which is just another of many components that come into this. So it's from cultivation to retail, and every point in between are addressed by this zoning ordinance.
Do you have any feedback from our neighboring states, Michigan or Colorado, as to the trials and tribulations they have had, and you know, what has it done as far as maybe you hear things about the cheaper drugs come in and then it gets mixed with fentanyl and whatever else. I mean, where are our neighboring states, the pros and cons that we're seeing, and what are we doing to kind of tweak from there that you're noticing?
It's a good question. That's not something that I've looked into or sort of sought out, primarily because these ordinances are based specifically on the Minnesota law. And that law, one very important part that I didn't include earlier, is that the law specifically says that a city cannot prohibit any of these types of cannabis businesses. And so the way that the legislative, I was gonna say scheme, the way that the legislative regime has been set up,
Mhm.
scheme for the record does not negative connotations, but it brings baggage, I would say. The regime that's imposed in the statute does not provide cities with the ability to say no for the most part. And so the things that I focus on in these kind of proceedings have been how to make sure the cities have as much kind of control as you want to have over these businesses within sort of, while also being legally conservative, kind of mirroring the statute so that it's a joke, but it's not really a joke. This is the framework, kind of the initial framework. We will have changes on this. Like we have a liquor bill we've had legal booze for 100 years. We have a liquor bill every 2 to 4 years. We're gonna have a cannabis bill every 2 to 4 years. So we'll send you updates when there's legislative changes, administrative rule updates, and we'll help you wade through the litigation that hopefully occurs to somebody else. So that doesn't exactly answer your question, but
No, absolutely.
Are there other questions or comments?
I got a bunch of them actually. So if you're looking at the table, so the cannabis manufacturing business is a interim use, and then the lower potency manufacturer is a conditional use. Any idea why, what shouldn't they be the same?
I believe that they are both interim uses under the table.
Okay.
The really great, one thing to clarify, if I may.
Sure.
You'll see in the table that we list all the zoning districts
Mhm.
because this will be incorporated into the main table. So the C is commercial, I is.
Oh, I
industrial,
gotcha.
And then the further Is are.
Okay.
light B.
Gotcha. So they're all, they're all interim use.
Yes,
Okay. That makes a lot more sense.
it doesn't help when there's no bold or underline tables.
Sure.
That's not a shot at them.
So I had a question. So section 5, what exactly are they getting at on that whole deal?
Yes, so section 5 is on page 8 and /19.
Correct.
Yes, so that is, there is a type of cannabis business or cannabis business that is referred to as a temporary cannabis event.
Mhm.
And those are going to be situations where someone who's licensed to sell cannabis has a temporary event that lasts no longer than 4 days. This amendment is intended to bring under the same umbrella that permit, so they'll get a license from the state, but this also means that they have to get a permit from the city so that you have more control over if those events were to occur here, how those events would occur. And one important thing to note on those is that the OCM recently announced that those event permits wouldn't be available until the summer. So we anticipate that one of the push updates that we'll be sending for this ordinance is related to temporary cannabis events, as we know kind of more about that as we move forward this year.
Mhm.
Gotcha. You got any, Pete?
I was just thinking, you were talking about the temporary events, would that be something like a farmer's market? Something like that, where it's there for like a weekend?
That's a really good question. I would describe it as a farmer's market with fences. There are significant, like performance standards that the statutory regime imposes on these businesses, which include things like it must be a contained area that has designated access points where you have to be 21 to enter, because there will be cannabis available. There would be cannabis available for sale within the temporary cannabis event. And so it is very regulated. Only, I think, mainly cannabis event.
Okay, so if it was like just a regular open farmer's market, they wouldn't be able to sell cannabis
That's
because it has to
correct.
be enclosed.
Yes.
Other questions?
Section 4, the city's got to do a spot check on it once a year on age. Sales station,
For retail, yes.
retail.
Yep.
I mean, I know we get some tax revenue put back to the state. Is it sufficient to cover I mean, it's once a year, which I don't know how effective that's gonna be, but is there enough revenue to cover that kind of thing?
So when, the city will be able to charge a permit fee, a registration fee, that is really intended to be the source of revenue that covers the cost of that check. But the city will also, under the current way the statute is written, receive what's called local government cannabis aid, which is divvied up based on the number of cannabis businesses within the city. So I think it's a 10, I use 10%. My dad's an accountant, not me, so I'm gonna say 10%, whatever it is. It's 10% tax, 1% that goes to the state, 1% of that will go to it's 0.5% will go to all cities. And that 0.5% is split up based on how many businesses are within each city. So if you have one, you'll get some of that. It's unclear how much that will be this time.
Going back to the chart, so what's the difference between commercial and industrial?
Great question. I generally, commercial are kind of forward facing, sort of store to the public. Businesses, industrial are usually, I want to say like manufacturing, businesses that aren't sort of generally open to the public.
Right. Cause yeah, it seems a little. For like indoor cultivation. Wouldn't it more be industrial versus commercial?
The reason, so this table, and I might defer to Emily, but I can say generally, the table was developed based on what uses are currently allowed within each of these districts anyway, so it was kind of matched up. But I don't know if Emily, you have any additional insight as to why.
Okay. I mean, I would say that's about what I would say. Depending on the size of community, I've seen communities generally split these sorts of uses between, commercial and industrial, something that's more like manufacturing, freight, like something that's more intensive like that would go into industrial district. And then commercial, like Joe said, would be more kind of like either small cultivators that also have the ability to sell their product up through storefronts. I would say that Credit River is a little more unique in that you don't have like a bona fide commercial district. So this is about what we could get out of the parcels that we were working with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, is this gonna require it? Sorry,
No, go ahead.
no, please do.
Yeah, cause I was just like the cultivation outdoor commercial. There's really not, yeah, yeah, I don't know. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that looking at that, it looks, cultivation outdoors is limited to, urban expansion reserve and rural residential. Thinking along those lines, this ordinance doesn't necessarily cover aspects if somebody wanted to grow for personal use. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Is that something that we're going to be expected to have an ordinance on, or is that governed just solely by state statute then?
Generally, it's governed by state statute.
Okay.
There are provisions providing that, individuals can grow items up to 8 plants depending on their maturity level.
Yeah.
The reason I'm hedging slightly is that I don't want to convey that everything in this wouldn't apply to personal. Sometimes there are things like, I don't want to say this specifically, but odor related things that could
Yes.
apply generally, but that's not how this is written. But I always try to avoid a situation where somebody can come back to a recording and say, oh, the attorney said that this doesn't apply. So that's the only reason for the hedge.
Yeah.
Chair, one conversation we had, and certainly Emily, Joe could elaborate better than I can about that ag use in your ordinance or urban expansion reserve and rural residential, if I'm not mistaken, allows ag as a permitted use. So we had to define that in some way. With a threshold of 10 acres, so. If they're getting into a commercial scale. They wouldn't necessarily, never say never, be able to apply. If they have less than 10 acres, and that's probably gonna catch most of those units.
Yeah. That's what I kind of figured,
Would you say, Emily, that's the
Yeah.
thought?
yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of, I read the state statute. Yes, it's like 137.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry you had to do that.
But yeah, to do like outdoor grill, yeah, you gotta put up a fence and security and, yeah, you'd have a ton of money just into,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't see where it would really. Yeah, ever make sense to do it, but
My anecdotal, very anecdotal insight is that, you know, generally the sophisticated commercial operation will try to be an indoor operation here in Minnesota.
Right.
You might see, I would say mom and pop, folks, or organic farmers trying to
sure,
do, outdoor, but it's not gonna be.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands, if not more, dollars just in a fence.
And like.
Yeah.
I prefer to think a significant performance standard, so.
Yeah.
Right.
If we may, looking at the definitions on page 12 of the packet, the first page of the ordinance. When we talk about public parks and park features, is that including our trails as well, or would those not be included?
I think that's a really good question, Madam Chair, that. Like, we might need to clarify, I can't imagine it would. I mean, it's a public way as opposed to a park feature, I mean, you could probably argue both ways.
Yeah.
But trails are a transportation tool.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah,
This is a
yeah,
question that gets
yeah.
asked all the time.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
And
And you should have said something
yeah.
right away.
No, I like watching, I thought it was good, you had it handled, I don't need to be a know-it-all for everything. What I've done is, kind of going along that legally conservative approach,
Mhm.
is the statute specifically tries to limit to park features regularly used by minors so that cities wouldn't be able to use sort of giant open wetland spaces as part of a buffer.
Yeah.
Where there's not for children generally. So, I mean, clearly playgrounds, athletic fields would qualify. Cities have made the argument that a trail should be buffered from.
Mhm.
When cities do that, I generally encourage them to look at, if you were to attempt to do that,
Mhm.
would it actually have an impact? Are there any properties within 500 feet of a trail
Yeah.
that could be sort of impacted by that buffer? And if there's not, a reasonable approach would be to not include them so that you're not the one, someone's gonna do it and someone's gonna get challenged on it.
Yeah.
And so it just depends on your kind of risk tolerance.
Sure. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify that in my own head. And then one of the things I think that has, just kind of drawn attention to is the 1 to 12,500. Talk to us about how that relates to the state law, and then also how does this relate to Scott County's ordinance? If we're handling the registration on the, Credit River's basis and other surrounding communities are handling their own, is the 1 to 12,000 considered countywide? Is it done on a community-wide basis?
It's a really good question. Yep. So there's two components and it's two thresholds when we're talking about the 1 per 12,500
Mhm.
language. The city is authorized to limit to no more than one based on its population. So because you have less than 12,500 and the city is retaining the ability to issue those registrations, the city can then say only one because our population is no more than one because of what our population is.
Yeah.
The statute also allows cities to say no to any retail if countywide there are 1 per 12,500 retail registrations issued by any city or the county.
Got it.
So if the county is doing the registration for a different city, or it's a different city doing the registrations, if let's say there's 125,000 people in the county, if we reach 10, I
Mhm.
don't do math good. If we reach 10 with anybody in the county, then the city of Credit River could say no to a retail.
Got it.
So that is the situation where you can prohibit or not allow a cannabis business. And that is what this ordinance says.
That's what I thought it was reading as, but I wanted to triple check, so. Are there other questions?
Savage come out and said they're in support of more than 10 themselves.
I don't know, but if they all go to Savage, then there doesn't need to be any anywhere else.
I got one more. So being that they're all interim use permits, how much like discretion does the city have? Let's just say somebody comes and says they want to do a cannabis testing business and they do all the paperwork, apply for the permit. Can the city deny them just because for whatever reason it's somewhere where they don't, how much discretion?
It's a level of discretion that isn't absolute. It has to be reasonable and related to sort of a negative impact of that business. A testing business is actually usually the example that I use for it's probably gonna be pretty easy for them to meet most of the requirements because of the sort of security and everything that's around that. But if they propose to go in a location where you don't have like the size trucks that would have to go to this business, that's something that then could be addressed through an IUP sort of application and denial process. So there's a higher level of discretion than obviously if it was permitted. But it's not, again, absolute.
One other important piece of the IUP element is that we understand it to be terminatable with the time limit. If so chosen by the city, actually IUPs, I think there's a statute, or they only go for so long in the first place.
Mhm.
That is why there is no CUPs on this, whereas that would more or less run with the land.
Mhm.
In this case, the IUP would be interim. And it's a critical parameter.
I guess the reason why I ask is that I don't know. Would it make sense for some of these to do commercial and industrial? Just, yeah. Because there's not, yeah. I mean, if you can still deny the permits. It would just make it a lot easier down the road. Say somebody comes and wants to do one of the businesses and it's in industrial, but it's, yeah, good for commercial or vice versa. It's a lot harder to make it work on the back end than to just, yeah, say they're both allowed. I don't know, just an idea.
Sorry, that is primarily a policy question on what types of businesses, use the planning commission and then ultimately the council or planning commission recommending, council approving is being allowed for that. Those areas, but there's nothing stopping you from recommending sort of expanding, but there are some things that, clearly would fall into like, I would say manufacturing, there's
Right,
two
yeah.
levels, which clearly, one of them clearly falls within the industrial. but,
Right.
You have the discretion to play around with it.
Right. Cause like the lower potency manufacturer is under commercial,
Mhm.
and that seems like it should be industrial. Because you're making something.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things with, a lower potency and edible manufacturer, a lot of them are breweries.
Oh,
Because they're making, the beverages.
oh, gotcha.
And so it's possible that, that's why that was put in commercial, but
Sure.
I think that, well, the table was made to sort of try and match
Mhm.
Mhm.
what was already in those districts, but again, you have the discretion, well, council's discretion to approve. You have the discretion to sort of make a recommendation on what you think about this.
I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah, like a transportation business, that doesn't really make sense for commercial. Also, yeah. I guess they're probably good.
Well, as I was looking at this, I think the minimum or the maximum thresholds for buffer. Were outlined by the state and we chose to go with that, as I understand it. Just looking at that, I think that makes a lot of sense. Overall, I was really glad to see that we had chosen to go with interim use permits. For the reasons that interim city administrator Johnson had outlined. That gives us flexibility if it's, if the business changes hands. Other circumstances that it goes with the business and not with the land, which I think is helpful under this circumstance. I noticed that it seemed like our ordinance mirrors what Scott County had passed in many respects. And so, as we think about ease of enforcement, having that, at least somewhat geographic uniformity, I think is just helpful. Where, if we see wide differences between communities, then it becomes, a little bit more patchwork or harder to understand and process. So, yeah, those were my initial thoughts. Anybody else have any additional questions, any initial thoughts that you want to share?
Is somebody, how common is it if you're a retailer that you check the box and do many of these other businesses at the same time, or is?
That's a good question. There's a general prohibition on owning multiple points of the production line. So and this is a little in the weeds, but I'm here for it. I wasn't even pausing for applause that time, but yeah, I appreciate the holding up the sign. Applause.
I'm slow.
I think Pete made a joke about something being half baked. We thought that was pretty good. I've done a ton of these and I didn't even come up with that. So Pete's a lyrical genius, as we'll say. I'm sorry. Could you ask your question?
How common is it, the multiple business lines?
Yep. So generally, if you have there's a subset of that's not listed here of businesses that could own multiple points in the line. Those are referred to as micro businesses and meso businesses, but those are size limited. So if you apply for a cannabis retail license, you can also have a delivery business license, but you could not have a manufacturing license. That is, so the way that this is set up is that if I were to have a micro business license and I wanted to operate in the commercial district, I could have an indoor, because I have this micro license, I could have an indoor cultivation space and a retail space sort of in the same area. But otherwise you can't have multiple points.
One other question, I guess. When Savage opens their 20 stores and starts drone delivering into our citizens,
You cannot shoot them down.
Yeah.
That's not my legal advice. That's just a general good opinion.
Does the city prohibit, drone delivery?
That's a good question. I don't believe I don't believe the city does currently prohibit drone delivery, and I've not looked into whether you can. I don't think so. I think that's regulated by the FAA if it's a certain height above the ground, but I don't have a real answer for you.
It's coming.
It's a good question.
I think I read somewhere that if there's a delivery, they have to check the age, make sure they're 21. And I don't know if a drone can check ID and check your age.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yes.
So
Good to know.
so that's a part of delivery that
Yes, absolutely.
check 21.
Yeah.
Yes, there has to be a double check. I was asked about delivery on a jet ski before, but not drones. So I have drones and jet skis. Claire was there. Claire was there for the jet ski. It's pretty good too.
All right.
Are you delivering by a jet ski?
Pizza.
Would you- Yeah.
No, it's only marina, so, but now my wheels are turning.
I can't give you any advice on that. That's incredible.
Pizza's delivered after.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're the munchies.
Yeah, in vain. Apologize for delivering.
That's gonna be the fifth there.
And at this stage, there's still some work that the Office of Cannabis Management needs to do before they're even at the stage for granting licenses, if I understand correctly.
The answer to that is somewhat complicated, but generally it's yes. There are a couple of different timelines that are working in tandem right now. As of Monday, the application window for retailers, for example, opened. There are some retail businesses that are going to be subject to a lottery and others that aren't.
Yeah,
And the lottery is expected to take place in May or June.
got it.
But for those other businesses, the city could start receiving official inquiries. I think the current estimation is sometime in April.
Okay,
And so adopting this on this timeline should still have this in place to protect the city should those inquiries come in.
makes sense.
I think what they're finding in Colorado is you hit saturation point for distribution and that they're not profitable, especially given all the regulations. And taxes and everything else that they're closing a lot of shops. It's gonna be like liquor stores. There's only so much you need. Boutiques. There's no end of boutiques in Prior Lake.
Did I say boutique? For your marina?
Boutiques, yeah.
Yes, it's a marina joke. Yeah.
All right, anybody have any other
One
questions?
question, I don't know if you know this, but has this ever had any impact on the illegal cannabis market that existed before this law came into place?
I can say that the legislative intent behind things like the inability for cities to prohibit cannabis businesses is exactly that, is to ensure that there are no areas of the state which are sort of blacked out from commercial cannabis in an attempt to not have pockets where the legal market could thrive. But otherwise, I don't really have information on the impact to the illegal market.
Okay.
Good
All right.
question.
Didn't know.
Any other questions? Going once, going twice? All right. Can I have a motion? On this proposed ordinance?
Move to approve the ordinance as presented.
I have a motion, do I have?
If you don't mind, sort of a friendly amendment. It would
Absolutely.
be, I think the appropriate motion, correct me where I'm moving, is a recommendation for the council to approve.
Oh, the recommendation, okay.
Yep, absolutely.
All
I
right,
move the recommendation that we approve
Yep.
the ordinance as presented.
all right, I have a motion, do I have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All right, motion and second, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion carries. All right, on to our next item of business, under general business. We have draft survey questions for the Parks and Trails Assessment. Commission members have received the following documents related to the item, which really just consist of the questions that planners have put together. So at this time, city staff, would you walk us through those draft questions and just high level background on what we're doing, just for anyone watching who might have missed the last meeting?
Oh, sure. I'll have to think back a little bit because I wasn't at that meeting, but my understanding with the parks assessment is just to both call attention to the parks that are maintained and run by the city and identify any opportunities to improve amenities, and they're kind of like, pick and choose how we want to proceed. I know there was some information about, thanks, Joe. There was some information too about funding and needing a parks assessment to be able to, was it amend the, fees in lieu of parkland dedication? I think we needed, okay, thanks, I'm getting caught up to speed. So before we really start digging into coming up with the recommendations, so, there's a community engagement piece that I'll go over momentarily, and then also, Claire and I will be digging more into the existing conditions, more objectively, going through some, data sources that we have through the state and the country. But I think the survey will be a good first step in just identifying, one, whether people know about the city parks, how they feel about it, but also some ideas for how to create some goals and strategies to support what the city ultimately wants to do. So my understanding is that you've already seen this survey. I think Claire went over it last month.
Yep.
So just a couple small tweaks that I can walk through.
That'd be great.
The first question, so are you aware that the city has 4 public parks? Was a suggestion last month, so we did add that just to kind of start off strong. Also breaking out a couple of the questions and just differentiating between city-owned parks and some of the regional parks around, just to make sure that, you can ask people if they come to the parks a lot, but they might not know if it's a city park or not. They just go to the parks that they feel like going to.
Yep.
So there are a couple of questions in there that have that differentiation. And then also, I think it was 6 through 8 on the second page. So would you like to see more city parks? Would you be supportive of the city pursuing additional park financing options? And do you have an interest in getting involved with parks? Those were all added.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm not sure if this was included in the last survey draft or not, but we would like to insert a map at the beginning just to show people where those parks are located, just for their own context, in case they don't know them by name. I think that's about it. It's a pretty simple survey, so I'm more than happy to take any more suggestions just to.
I think the map is a really good idea.
Yep.
Because
we
I think
usually
that
do
is something that is, even if people use it frequently or infrequently, they just may not remember what it's called. So I think that's really smart. Also may help build some awareness. Oh yeah, we do have parks. So,
It's a good start.
yeah. Anybody else?
Do you think we should add a question along the lines of like, how often would you use the city parks if they were updated or something along those lines?
Certain, yeah, like would improvements make you more inclined to come to the parks?
something like that.
Sure. Yeah, we can have
Just
that.
to kind of get a feel for, if people aren't using them now, but they would, if there's better amenities or whatever. Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Number 10, the trails are in the parks or the trails link the park or outside the parks?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I guess I've been to some of those parks, so I don't necessarily remember. Are there trails within the parks, or is the trail linking the parks, or trail is different than a park? Is that correct?
I think it would be a little bit of both without having gone through the park inventory yet. I think there are trails connecting the parks together. So at least how I differentiate it in my brain is that trails kind of connect the parks together or serve as that transient space that we talked about a little bit ago with the Canvas stuff, and then more like walking paths or things within the parks if they
So that we,
are there.
yeah,
So.
we,
Just clear. Yeah.
But there are between.
No.
Oh, there aren't.
Those are
Oh,
all
I'm
private.
sorry. I thought
Those
there
would all be
was.
private.
Yeah, so
Oh,
I guess,
okay.
so I guess number 10, given we don't have trails in the parks. It might be a better question. How often do you use the Credit River City trails? Or something like that.
or if we don't own them
We don't-
and they're part of the county highway system, how often do you use trails along county roads?
Is that the only trail we have is that's 21? Or 185th?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, now we're 27. Got you. But is that city or is that? Other county? Okay.
you could just phrase it generally. I think, there's been some talk over past meetings where, the idea of, as neighborhoods develop, putting trails in with the eventuality that they would connect to one another and then to parks. So, I don't think that's out of the realm. It's just not how it, kind of works right now. But that's a very good question, Dave.
Or maybe how apt would you, or how often would you use city trails? If they existed, I could phrase that a little bit better. but-
Yeah, something along those lines would be good.
Madam Chair, would it be? Maybe the thought is. Is it appropriate or is it a goal or is it a desire for city to have a citywide? I should say it's citywide, but a
Trail network.
thoughtful trail network. And do you feel you would use it, something that
I would-
maybe that connect neighborhoods or that connected parks, something, doesn't mean it's a web everywhere, but is there a line somewhere of some
Mhm.
thought that maybe should be kicked around? Is
Yeah.
that something people might use? I know they're pretty well received in a lot of communities, but there's always costs to those.
Yeah,
So there's that, and then. Maybe I'd like to call your attention, number 6, is would you like to see more city parks in Credit River? When you give these kind of surveys, you're gonna very divisive question. Maybe it can be phrased in a slightly different way, that still give people opportunity to say. That you can get where they're coming from versus just yes or no.
yeah,
If for example, if should there, there be a park within 2,000, half a mile of every home, or should there be, what, I don't know how you come up with something, but where you
That's-
can have a more thoughtful question that gives people versus just the rigidity of yes and no.
mhm,
Cause you can go, it's like saying, hey, we should build splash pads. Yeah, everybody should do that, but do you wanna pay for them? Well, no, so
Yeah.
how do you phrase that question in a
yeah.
different
Meaningful
way?
way,
I don't know, just a thought.
yeah,
Yeah. Parks are great over there, I don't want them next to my house, is it?
there are, some-
So it's just how do you begin to think about that?
yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
So that, it sounds like that, rethinking that question slightly might be, to gather a little bit more information might be helpful. In some context. Otherwise, for the most part. It's a good number of questions, so people aren't gonna get fatigued, even with an addition and with tweaks. I think. I'm curious about timing and then thinking along the lines too of what are the means by eventual, getting this out into the community when we're ready to do so.
Sorry, did you have a?
Just one quick thing here. Question 5, when it says, how will you rate the overall conditions of the city park facilities? You have excellent, good, fair. I think the follow-up question should be number 7, that comes right after 5. Because then said, would you be supportive of the city pursuing additional park financing options, to support improvements to existing parks? So I think 7 would be a good follow-up to 5 right after that.
Absolutely, if I can,
That.
that's a super easy change. But back to your point about just kind of the timing and things, so. In talking to Claire, I think the next step would just be to, make those final changes at the map, clarify some of the language, and then start working with staff to. Distribute and promote the survey. I don't know if you've talked to Claire on kind of the timing on how long the survey would be open. I don't think this is a particularly long planning process, so, wouldn't want to drag out the survey too long, just because, you might tell someone, this survey is open for the next 2 months, and it's a good excuse for them to say, okay, I'll take it,
Yeah,
when I'm free or whatever. So I think this could be a relatively condensed survey period. Just need to think of some good channels that we can, efficiently get the word out.
But the good news is the city is standing up it has had a Facebook page.
Mhm.
And now we're kind of considering a more formal policy of using it. We've started a newsletter, so those are coming out.
Yeah.
And the
Fantastic.
city does its website, a few other things. So
Mhm.
I think we've been able to grow that a little better recently.
Yeah.
Um, there's always the mailing aspect of it. Are you gonna reach somebody differently if you do a mailing? Maybe. But but we'll talk about that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, are there any opportunities, natural opportunities coming up with other mailings going out where you could slip,
Well,
insert some text?
We're gonna have 4 communities with, for example, on their CSTSs, we'll have
Mhm.
some meetings with them, but they'll have a rate, so they're gonna come in with really good news in the first place, right? So, but nevertheless.
Yeah.
But also the city council does do summer park meetings there. I mean, I don't know what the timing of all that would best be, but those would be another option and.
Yeah, those engagement opportunities might be a great opportunity if the timing aligns.
In terms of doing like a physical pop-up event for engagement or?
Well, the council members have had events at the parks
Mhm.
themselves, so, I don't know when the ideal timing is for getting the survey out, but I'm guessing engagement season really doesn't start until the snow leaves. The weather's a little better. But just thinking if that was aligned, maybe that, could be a good opportunity.
I know that we had a couple other advisory committees and I know the Vision one did a survey. Is that something that we would do similarly, or are we thinking of a different route as far as getting the survey out?
What was the first part of that?
So first of all, well, we have a couple other advisory committees right now.
Oh, sure.
One is a Vision Committee, and the other one's a Government Building and Land Advisory Committee. And I think the Vision Committee did a mailing. I think they sent something out. And then, of course, they had one of these QR codes you can scan, and then they had which would take you to a website to do the survey. But there's, some money involved with doing something like that. And I don't know if that's our similar attitude for doing this kind of a survey, or do we have something?
Yeah, Emily, I would argue that the survey cost, they sent out some card. They had the QR code, as you noted. Ballpark, if I recall, was about $1,700, for the mailing and the production of the cards, what have you. So, I mean, if this is something you wanted to do, I think that we would ask the council for that permission from a cost standpoint, but the other avenues are pretty very little cost. I
Mhm.
mean, and see what you get. I think if you think you're not hitting a particular area with those digital outreaches
Mhm.
because we do send out a hard newsletter twice a year. So that'll come out in early summer. So they will get that. So that can be a page in the mailing too.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea.
Yeah, so, so I think there's ways to do it. It's just getting people to click that link, and.
Gotta make it really
you know,
eye-catching.
What was the, sorry, what was the fee, what was the response rate of the mailing the city did?
I think there were about 400 people that responded to that out of, I don't know, however many households you have, 1,500, I made it a mayor. Closer to 2,000. Closer to 2,000, so.
Well, it doesn't hurt to spray the free ones out there. If you get 3 people respond, then we gotta talk about doing something else. Apparently.
Yeah, I would say the Facebook page, we've also had people post about it on Nextdoor if Credit River has one, just any sort of social media channels
Mhm.
along with newsletters. I mean, we already have templates that we can just plug in the info. I like the suggestion about the QR code. We usually incorporate that too. So yeah, we try to make it as, low friction as possible to get people to engage with it. So I'm not too worried about
Free
the
Credit
stuff.
River t-shirt.
I mean.
You have a logo.
Just submit your social security number, your driver's license number, your.
I mean. While
Yeah.
we're at it.
Yeah, so just generally timing wise, once the questions are finalized, what are we thinking about? Spring, summer for the survey?
I mean, it sounds like there are some good avenues that coincide well with the start of summer and also when people would be interacting with the parks or at least thinking about going outside again. So, I mean, I can't speak for Claire because she's ultimately the project manager, but it makes the most sense to, maybe focus more on the stuff that we can look up online right now, just internally, and then get more into the engagement in a little bit. But
Yeah,
I can get you a more solid answer next month.
all good. I was just thinking, trying to time it out in conjunction with use makes a lot of sense, so.
Mhm.
And if there are naturally occurring opportunities for communication where, that newsletter with a QR code or something like that could work, that might be good if that fits within the overall timeline for the plan. So, any other thoughts or comments?
I got one more. I'm not trying to nitpick these questions, but number 8 might be a little confusing, or at least it is for me. So it says, do you have any interest in getting involved with parks? Does that mean like using park, or what does it
For like
mean?
park maintenance.
Or what is getting involved?
I mean, that's a
Volunteering.
good question.
Just be clear, volunteering.
But yeah,
Volunteering to maintain, stabilize, enhance, whatever,
yeah.
and maybe
That's a
adopt
good
a
question.
kind of nonsense, as they say, and.
It's just a little, some people might not.
Oh, yeah, no, agreed.
Yep, that's a good call.
Just the park survey administrator.
There you go. All right, any other last questions, comments? All right. I think our next order of business on the agenda is to adjourn the meeting. If there is no other business before us, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I was just gonna say.
Oh, did you need action?
I think we asked for a motion.
Oh, okay, can I get a motion,
Okay.
to,
Well,
I
maybe not, we didn't, but.
was gonna say, I didn't see any,
No,
but,
I didn't actually, but.
okay. Is there anything formal you need from us then?
No.
Okay,
You don't need to approve it with the amendments or whatever, or? Okay.
doesn't sound like it, so, but good question. All right, with there being no other business before us, can I get a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting of the planning commission?
Make the motion to adjourn the planning commission.
All right, can I get a second?
I'll second that.
All right, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye.